The year is 1919. The Great War, a tempest of unprecedented carnage, has finally subsided. Munich, a city steeped in Bavarian tradition, bears the scars of conflict and defeat. The air is thick with disillusionment. The stench of poverty clings to the cobbled streets. Defeated soldiers, their dreams shattered, roam aimlessly. The Treaty of Versailles, a heavy shroud of retribution, hangs over Germany. The once proud nation is blamed, shamed, and forced to its knees. The war guilt clause, a bitter pill to swallow, fuels resentment. The seeds of anger and humiliation are sown. Amidst this turmoil, a wounded veteran walks the streets. Unnoticed, invisible, he carries within him the embers of an ambition, a burning resentment that will one day set the world ablaze. This is Adolf Hitler, a name whispered in the taverns and beer halls, a name that will soon echo through history. Before the war, Hitler was an aspiring artist. Vienna, the heart of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was his canvas. But his dreams were dashed against the harsh reality of rejection. He found solace in the bustling cafes, immersing himself in political pamphlets and newspapers. The outbreak of the Great War ignited a fire within him. He saw it as a chance for redemption, an opportunity to prove his worth to the nation that had spurned his artistic aspirations. He enlisted in the Bavarian army, eager to taste the glory of combat. The horrors of the trenches, the deafening roar of artillery, the stench of death, left an indelible mark on his psyche. He emerged from the war a changed man, hardened, bitter, and consumed by a sense of destiny. He believed that fate had spared him for a greater purpose. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in the opulent Palace of Versailles, was meant to be a treaty of peace. It was intended to bring an end to the horrors of World War I and to lay the foundation for a lasting peace in Europe. The grand halls of Versailles echoed with the hopes of a world weary of conflict. Instead, it became a breeding ground for resentment. The German people, who had already suffered immensely during the war, found themselves facing even greater hardships. The treaty was seen not as a path to peace, but as a punitive measure designed to humiliate and cripple their nation. The treaty's harsh terms, particularly the crippling reparations and territorial losses, were a heavy blow to the German psyche. The financial reparations demanded were astronomical, plunging the already struggling German economy into further despair. Territories that had been integral to Germany's identity and economy were stripped away, leaving a sense of loss and injustice. Germany was forced to accept sole responsibility for the war. This clause, known as the War Guilt Clause, was particularly galling. It painted Germany as the sole villain of the conflict, ignoring the complex web of alliances and events that had led to the war. This sense of unjust blame festered in the German consciousness. The once mighty German army was reduced to a shadow of its former self. The treaty imposed severe restrictions on the size and capabilities of the German military. Proud soldiers who had once marched with confidence now found themselves disbanded, their units dissolved, their weapons confiscated. The Rhineland, Germany's industrial heartland, was occupied by Allied forces. This occupation was a constant reminder of their subjugation. The region, rich in resources and industry, was vital to Germany's economic recovery, yet it was under foreign control, stifling any hope of a swift economic rebound. The economic consequences were devastating. Inflation soared, unemployment skyrocketed. The German mark became virtually worthless, and people found themselves unable to afford basic necessities. Long lines at unemployment offices and soup kitchens became a common sight as despair gripped the nation. The German people felt betrayed and humiliated. They had been promised a fair peace, but what they received felt like a death sentence. The sense of national pride that had once been a cornerstone of German identity was shattered, replaced by a deep-seated anger and a desire for retribution. They yearned for a leader, a savior, who would restore their lost pride and return Germany to its former glory. The political landscape became a fertile ground for radical ideologies, as people searched for someone who could offer them hope and a way out of their misery. Into this vacuum of despair stepped Adolf Hitler, a charismatic demagogue who offered them a scapegoat for their misery. The Jews, the communists, and the democratic government he claimed had stabbed them in the back. His fiery speeches and promises of a restored Germany resonated deeply with a population desperate for change. The seeds of a new, even more devastating conflict were sown in the fertile soil of resentment and despair left by the Treaty of Versailles. Section 4. A Voice in the Wilderness, the Birth of a Demagogue. In the beer halls and coffee houses of Munich, a new political force was emerging. These were places where people gathered not just to drink and socialize, but to discuss the pressing issues of the day. The air was thick with the scent of beer and the fervor of political debate. It was in these humble settings that the seeds of a dark future were sown. The German Workers' Party, a small and insignificant group at the time, preached a message of nationalism and anti-Semitism. They were a fringe group, often dismissed by the mainstream, but their ideas were beginning to take root. The party's meetings were modest, attended by a handful of disillusioned individuals seeking answers in a time of uncertainty. It was here that Adolf Hitler found his voice, his stage, his destiny. Initially, he was just another face in the crowd, but his passion and fervor quickly set him apart. He was a man on a mission, driven by a burning desire to reshape Germany's future. His early speeches were raw and unpolished, but they carried a powerful message that resonated with those who heard him. Hitler's oratory skills were mesmerizing. He had a way of speaking that captivated his audience, drawing them in with his intense gaze and fervent words. His speeches were a blend of fiery rhetoric and calculated pauses, designed to stir emotions and provoke thought. He was a master of manipulation, using his voice to weave a narrative that was both compelling and dangerous. He had an uncanny ability to tap into the anger and frustration of the masses. He spoke to their fears, their insecurities, and their hopes for a better future. He painted a picture of a Germany that had been wronged, a nation that had been humiliated and betrayed. His words were a balm for the wounded pride of a people struggling to find their place in a post-war world. He spoke of national humiliation, of economic hardship, of a Jewish conspiracy to control the world. These were themes that struck a chord with his audience, who were desperate for someone to blame for their suffering. He offered them a scapegoat, a target for their anger and frustration. His speeches were filled with venom and hatred, but they were also filled with promises of a brighter future. His words, laced with venom and hatred, resonated with an audience desperate for answers, for someone to blame. They were willing to listen, to believe, to follow. They saw in him a leader who could restore their pride, who could make Germany great again. His message was simple, yet powerful, and it fell on fertile ground. He promised to restore Germany to its rightful place in the world. He spoke of a glorious future, a future where Germany would rise from the ashes of defeat and reclaim its position as a world power. His vision was grand, his promises bold, and his followers were eager to believe. He promised to tear up the Treaty of Versailles, a symbol of Germany's humiliation and defeat. He vowed to undo the injustices inflicted upon the German people, to restore their honor and dignity. His words were a rallying cry, a call to action for those who felt betrayed by their leaders and abandoned by the world. He promised to make Germany great again. This simple yet powerful message resonated deeply with his audience. They were tired of suffering, tired of being seen as the defeated. They wanted to believe in a leader who could bring about real change, who could lead them to a brighter future. His message, a dangerous cocktail of nationalism, anti-Semitism, and promises of a glorious future, fell on fertile ground. The people were ready for change, ready to follow a leader who spoke to their deepest fears and highest hopes. And so, in the beer halls and coffee houses of Munich, the birth of a demagogue was witnessed, a man who would go on to change the course of history in ways that few could have imagined. Section 5. The Beer Hall, Putsch, a failed coup, a future forged. Emboldened by his growing popularity, Hitler decided to seize power. On November 8, 1923, he and his followers stormed a beer hall in Munich where the Bavarian government was meeting. The beer hall Putsch, as it came to be known, was a desperate gamble that failed spectacularly. The putsch was poorly planned and badly executed. The police were waiting. In the ensuing chaos, 16 Nazis and 4 policemen were killed. Hitler himself was arrested and charged with high treason. The failed coup could have been the end of his political career. Instead, it became the making of him. Section 6. Mein Kampf, the Blueprint of Hate. This book, written by Adolf Hitler, would become one of the most infamous texts in history, a manifesto that laid the groundwork for the horrors that were to come. Landsberg prison, where Hitler was incarcerated after his failed coup attempt in 1923, became his crucible. It was within these cold, confining walls that he found the time and solitude to articulate his twisted ideology. It was here in the solitude of his cell that he penned his infamous manifesto, Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. This book was not just a personal account of his life and beliefs, but a detailed plan for the future of Germany and the world. This rambling, hate-filled diatribe outlined his twisted worldview and his plans for Germany. It was a mixture of autobiography, political ideology, and a call to arms for his followers. The book was filled with vitriol and venom, targeting those he deemed enemies of the Aryan race. In Mein Kampf, Hitler railed against the Jews, whom he blamed for all of Germany's ills. He accused them of being the root cause of the nation's economic woes, political instability, and moral decay. His anti-Semitic rhetoric was not just a personal vendetta, but a central tenet of his political strategy. He outlined his belief in the superiority of the Aryan race and his vision of a greater Germany that would rule Europe. This vision was not just about territorial expansion, but about creating a racially pure state, free from those he considered inferior. He called for the elimination of democracy, which he saw as a weak and decadent system. In its place, he envisioned a totalitarian regime led by a single, all-powerful leader, himself. He believed that only through such a system could Germany achieve its true potential. Mein Kampf was a blueprint for disaster, a roadmap to genocide. It laid out in chilling detail the steps he would take to achieve his goals, including the use of propaganda, violence, and terror. Yet, it was largely ignored at the time, dismissed as the ravings of a madman. Many people, both in Germany and abroad, underestimated the danger posed by Hitler and his ideas. They saw him as a fringe figure, not realizing the impact his words would eventually have. Few could have imagined that this hateful screed would one day become the Bible of a totalitarian regime that would plunge the world into darkness. The ideas expressed in Mein Kampf would lead to the rise of the Nazi Party, the outbreak of World War II, and the Holocaust, resulting in the deaths of millions. It serves as a grim reminder of the power of words and the devastating impact they can have when used to spread hate and incite violence.